Barry's background includes serving as head archivist, assistant curator, and development manager at the Haggin Museum in Stockton, California, and as part-time historical consultant and site manager of the historic Klamath Ferry Center in Stockton. He served as assistant curator of the Houston Cultural Heritage Society from 98 to 99. From 99 to 2006, Barry served with the Battleship Texas San Jacinto Battleground Historic Park, Texas Parks and Wildlife, first as a curator, promoted to director. In 2006, he became the executive director of the Battleship Texas Foundation, where he served until taking the helm at Trees for Houston. Barry is the executive director of Trees for Houston since 2008. The society was founded in 1983 as the Live Oak Society and has expanded to plant, protect, and promote all of Houston's trees. Barry manages all conservation, project, and administrative aspects of the organization, which now has a $1.5 million annual budget, and he established and manages their 20,000 tree nursery operation. Barry, thank you so much for coming.
Thanks for having me. I appreciate it, and I'll dive right in. As Beth said, Houston has been around since 1983, so it's not a particularly young organization. It is, however, relatively new to its current model. When I was hired away from Parks and Wildlife, the idea was for me to grow it into a regional organization as opposed to a very localized organization in just a few that was working in just a few neighborhoods within Houston proper, inside of the loop. So we've accomplished that, plant in anywhere from 15 to 20 counties per year now. And in normal years, we plant 20 to 25,000 trees. This year, we barely hit 15,000 trees because we lost our spring planting season to COVID. So that being said, 15,000 trees still puts us as by far and away the most effective, in terms of quantity, effective regional tree planting organization in North America. So we get a lot done here, in no small part, in my opinion, to the fact that Houston, both in Houston proper and all around the region, has dozens and dozens of groups just like yourselves that believe in these kinds of missions of green space, native flora, native fauna, natural habitat, and the quality of life, not just for critters, but for humans that can provide. So it makes my job a lot easier. So as I said, Trees for Houston, we planted about 15,000 trees. Most of y'all, I'm sure, are familiar with Exploration Green. So we'll find an organization like that has, they've got a real solid core of people there that they're doing. They'll funnel trees to use them so that they can get those trees in the ground. And then it helps us to be more efficient because I'm not having to plant and water every single tree. We try very hard to focus on appropriate natives. It's not always possible because often our partners, let's say it's the city of Houston or some other partner or contractor, may demand something that's non-native. So sometimes we're backed into a corner and we have to do that. That being said, y'all, I don't need to repeat all of the obvious reasons why we strive really hard to just plant native trees. Sometimes one of our biggest challenges is sourcing those trees, because what may seem native is really not if you start to get right down to it. A live oak from acorns out of South Florida, and it's still a live oak, but it's not really native. So we try really hard to source our product appropriately. Again, that's easy. It's almost always easier said than done, but we try very hard to source good native material from local sources. Additionally, we budget for a minimum of 20 schools per year in the greater Houston area. Last year we did about 35 schools. So we'll go into school campuses, we plant those, and we'll water those for 2 years as well. So we try really hard to beautify campuses around the region. We do trails, parks, streets. I was happy to see the tree of the month was Mexican plum, that is one of my go-to species for small trees, both as a esplanade tree and as a campus tree, because they are so durable and such a kind of a multifaceted benefit to the local biome or local environment. So we do a lot of trees like that as well. We occasionally do gardens. We occasionally do fruit orchards. Really, if it involves a tree, we want to be involved with it as much as we can and be as helpful as we can to both individuals and organizations all over the region. We have our own tree farms. That's part of the way we keep our costs down. We grow trees on our own, and when the tree market is much like any other commodity, with the exception that trees have a very long pipeline until you can get the tree to market. So if you're talking about a bushel of wheat, that's a 9-month lead time. If you're talking about a tree, though, that's a 3 to 5 to even 7-year lead time. So what we do is we grow trees, and we always have a supply of 5,000 to 7,000 trees. And then if the market on trees is really high, I'll use my own and save money. And if the market goes down like it is right now, I'll buy more trees because I can get more bang for my buck. So we try and have our tree farms as a hedge fund, if you will, against the cost curve in the economy. The other thing we'll do is more and more we're growing species that we just can't get out of the market. If anybody tries to go out and find a species that's unusual, you know how that is. You can find a live oak at every grower in the county, but trying to find a Mexican persimmon or something is very, very difficult indeed. So we use it for those purposes as well. And as I said, we get a lot of trees done. We work all over the region. And I guess with that's probably the good Reader's Digest version of what we do. And with that, I'd be happy to start taking questions about what we do, or what about trees you have questions for, or how we may help you. I'd love to take those questions.
Vera, how many people work for your organization?
So we have 12 people. We have 6 that are full-time field staff. I have 4, including myself, that are more or less office staff. And then I have 2 that are 50-50. So we're 12 people. Our budget last year was actually almost $2 million. We're going to back that down next year because I know I won't be able to raise that much money. So we'll go back down to about $1.5 million this coming year. But I have people at the tree farms 7 days a week working on our nursery, keeping those trees, getting them ready to go. And this time of year, we're winding down our distributions. I wish we could give more trees away in the winter, but people are so trained to plant their trees in the spring, and I really wish we could get them away early, but we're still actually doing tree distributions at farmers markets and things like that. So those 12 people are quite busy, and we managed to hang on to all 12 people through the COVID deal. So we're pretty fortunate.
I'm reading some of the questions that have come in. The first one is, do you have American fringe trees in your inventory?
I do, and I've given away about 150 of those over the last 2 Saturdays. So I don't know if I have any left, but I get those whenever I can, and I save them. And I couldn't find anybody who would let me plant them, so I just started giving them away.
Also, a good question from Jerry. Can you tell us a little about how you train volunteers to plant trees?
Sure. The first thing I'll mention is I do have a video online. So if somebody's never touched a shovel and planted a tree before, you can always pop on to our website and look at my video. So every time we go out and do a planting with volunteers, about the first 30 minutes is spent with me personally planting a tree together. So nobody plants that tree until they've gone through that experience with me. And it's, for most people, and for most trees, most of the time, planting that tree, it's pretty simple stuff. And the trees, particularly if you're doing natives, they kind of know what to do. You get it in a hole, you put some water on it, it'll do okay. That being said, we're investing a lot of charitable money into these projects, and the trees that we're leaving at schools or in parks are not getting the same kind of care that you'll get, that you'll take care of it in your own front yard. So I spend a lot of time talking about the microbiology of the tree, the structure of the tree, why we're doing what we're doing. We take a look at the soil we're planting it in, and talk about why we want that planted at grade or 2 inches high, or, you know, sometimes, very rarely, but sometimes even low grade. So we talk about all that, and we go through everything so that they understand why we are or why we're not shaping those roots, or what we're doing to that tree as it goes in, and why we're not necessarily putting amendments in. So many people think that, you know, you plant something, you've just got to pour some chemical on it, and that's just not necessarily the case. There may be a time for that, but usually if you plant a healthy tree in the right place, there's no need for that. So I spend a lot of time every time we go out to plant with people, showing them how we do it, and the little things we do that bring down tree mortality and tree morbidity. Because if you think about it, if you're doing 20,000 trees a year on charitable dollars, and just a few little measures taken while planting can reduce my morbidity by a couple percent, well, I'm going to save enough money to plant a whole extra school that year based on that lower morbidity. So the saying we like to use in our organization is, don't put a $200 tree in a $2 hole. So, you know, you put a lot of money into your plant material. Don't then go and just kind of go off half-cocked on your planting effort. Taking a little bit of time when you plant it will pay off big dividends down the line.
You've mentioned a couple times that you're charitable, that, you know, it's a charitable thing. Are you aligned budget to anybody, Houston or the parks? Or
we are not. We are 100% nonprofit, 501c3. We are independent. We're apolitical. I'm prohibited from lobbying. We are just a project organization, and I receive no budgeted money from anybody on any given year. So everything I spend, I have to raise every 12 months.
Wow.
And it's all private.
Do you sell to the general public or residential homeowners?
I very rarely sell, but I very frequently give it away. I don't like to sell it. I occasionally will, depending on circumstances. If I don't have material and I need to buy it for a project, sometimes I'll sell it at cost. I really assiduously try to not get into a position where I'm competing with local growers.
Okay, I've got lots of species-specific questions. You ready for those?
Fire away. I'll make something up if I don't know it.
Okay, someone was asking, what is the best time of year to start cuttings from a red mulberry tree?
You know, so from cuttings, it varies from species to species dramatically. Mulberry, I'm gonna guess, is one you could do year-round even. That's gonna be one of the less delicate species. So, you know, I would take soft tissue, don't take woody tissue, obviously. Take soft tissue, buy some synthetic auxin, dip it, and as long as you protect it, keep that soil moist, and protect it from the real strong heat, you should have no problem at all doing a red mulberry all summer long.
Do you have native sweet gums? This person thinks that that when they go shopping commercially, they are only finding cultivars now. Can you still find natives at farmers markets, or do you have them?
No, you can't find them at, well, I should say you can't. It would be exceptional to find a native
Sweet gum?
A native sweet gum around here. They're a funny species because there are other parts of the world including much of the West Coast, where those are grown into specimens. It's like street trees and front yard trees. You come down here and people treat it like it's crabgrass. It's really interesting how the perception goes. Whenever I don't need them very often as a named tree in a design project, but when I do, they're virtually impossible to get. The best way, if I needed them for a project, would be if I knew 3 or 4 years ahead of time, I would go out and collect my own seed and I would grow them that way. But you could try Doremus Nursery. That would be the only one. The other thing I would do is if you really wanted them, would be to get a seedling batch out of like Rennerwood or somewhere like that. But you're not going to find a 5, 10, or 15 gallon native liquid amber around here. There's no market for them. And so when there's no market, the growers won't grow them.
Have you worked with specifically HOAs to educate them about improving their tree stocks?
I do. I'll probably do 7 or 8 HOAs a year across an 8 or 9 county region. That being said, at that number, I'm only hitting a very small percentage of them. But yeah, I try very hard. And for all y'all out there, anybody who has an HOA that thinks they might want to look at the collective health or the canopy health or the pallets that they have in their neighborhood, I'm happy to work with you at no cost.
Wow. Do you go to an area bigger than Houston? Do you go to Austin?
Yeah, so this weekend I spent Saturday in Pasadena and Sunday in Conroe. Last year in total, I planted in about 16 different counties.
Wow. And what organizations do you typically work with? Schools? And do you go to people that are building a commercial building and help them with what's the scope of your customers, let's say?
It's across the board. I will probably once or twice a month, I'll go out to somebody's house who doesn't have the physical or financial ability to plant a tree, and I'll go plant a tree for them. I'll give them a tree and I'll put it in their yard for them. Other times I'll work with developers who have, say they have X impact on the environment and have to put X number of trees back. Well, what I'll do is I'll negotiate with them and say, okay, law says you have to put in 100 trees. If you put in 200 trees and water them, I'll help you bring the cost down to that project with my expertise. That way I encourage developers to do more than they legally have to. I work with cities, I work with homeowners, schools. As I said, I do usually a minimum of 20, but usually 30 or 40 schools per year. I work with large corporations, you name it, and I've worked with them. I also have a policy of not charging other nonprofits. So when some other nonprofit requires trees, I want their charitable dollars to go to their mission, not to the tree portion. So I grow trees for the Houston Zoo. I planted the Manil last year. Libraries, children's homes, you name it. Those places that have a structure that need trees. I try very hard to donate all of the trees for those types of organizations.
Somebody asked a question, what size tree, gallon-wise, would you recommend to plant in a park that would not get irrigation but would be mulched twice a year? Is there any hope for that tree? No irrigation?
Not much hope. There's one thing you can do. Whoever that is, just have them call me and let me see if I can tag it onto one of my projects if they want to get into the park. And I have some hydrogel technology that's relatively new that I'm experimenting with, where we might get that done. But if it was going to have no watering whatsoever other than rainfall, the first thing I would say is the only viable month to plant that in is the time is early December. Don't plant it earlier, don't plant it later. And then I would plant no smaller than 5 gallon, no bigger than 15 gallon. It also depends on the species though.
Okay. And how often should you water an oak tree that is still young? How often?
So I'm not sure what still young is. If you
Me
could tell me
neither.
what that means. And I also need to know whether it's in a pot or in the ground.
I think it's in native soil. It's in the ground.
So the key is, if it's still young, meaning if it's less than 2 years old, you need to make sure that the ground stays slightly moist around it. And the test for that is take like an old-fashioned Bic pen and shove that into the ground in the root zone of that small tree. If it goes in reasonably easily because the ground is still wet, it's okay. If it's sodden, it just slopes right in like mud, obviously it's too wet. But if you got to force it in, it's too dry. That's one kind of easy test without me actually seeing it to tell you what you could do. But you need to keep that oak tree ground moist for the first couple of years. And then now it may do it on its own. Oaks in nature took care of themselves long before we did. That being said, the mortality rate is over 99%. There's a reason why an oak tree puts out, 400 or 500 pounds of acorns when it goes into mast. And that's because the vast majority of those are never going to germinate. And of those that do germinate, there's about a 99% failure rate after a year. So you want to keep it moist. And then after 2 to 3 years, depending on the situation, you generally can leave that alone as far as water is concerned. If it's after 2 or 3 years old and you really want to make sure that thing keeps growing, continue to water it anyways. And that will be the difference between an oak tree slowly growing or it's absolutely thriving and putting on a foot of growth per year. So keep watering them for as long as you can, and they'll just keep growing very fast. Live oaks are the best example of that. They'll grow at a moderate pace for 5 to 10 years if you don't water them. If you do water them, they'll grow like a weed for about 12 years. In fact, I wish, I'm tempted to take it off of me and show you my lawn. I'm sitting in front of right now I'm outside of my front yard. I'm sitting in front of about a 35-foot live oak that I planted 9 years ago as a 15-gallon tree. And it's well taller than my 2-story house. And across the street are 15-gallon oak trees that I planted at the exact same time. It's on the edge of the street across the street. And those are only maybe 12 feet right now because I didn't give them supplemental water after 2 years. And so the only difference is the amount of water they've gotten over the years. And some of the trees in my yard are almost 3 times as large as the ones across the street. So water is everything.
Water is everything. I just wonder, this is my question. When developers get done with a brand new neighborhood, they only use like 5 different trees that are intended to be, 25 feet tall. Does that seem like the right plan to you?
Not really. Well, from a botanical point of view, absolutely not. It's a horrible idea for a number of reasons.
Thank you.
But I understand exactly why they do it. They have an approved list from the city or the HOA, and they need to go out and they need to have people plant those who usually don't really know what they're doing. And they go in, and it's just like any other project or widget you're building. When you do the same thing over and over again, it saves you a lot of money. The way the code generally is written and the way the market and the prices of stuff are, they're incentivized to not do interesting stuff. That's a really hard one to change. The other problem is the code, sometimes very well intended, says, okay, at every house, you need to put in 2 trees or even 1 tree, but it has to be a minimum of 2 inches. Well, and it has to be one of these oak species. So you go in and then you throw in 2 2-inch live oaks in a space that really couldn't even take 1 live oak at semi-maturity. So the code is often at odds with common sense if you knew what trees do after 10 years. But the builders don't care, and those that do care often can't do anything about it. So that it's not always just the builder's fault. There's a bunch of problems out there that make it very difficult for sensible planting programs in new neighborhoods.
Okay, this is a pretty good question. Someone has written, my neighborhood wants to cut down all the live oaks that were planted too close to the homes, and the roots are getting into the sanitary sewer lines running near the trees. Can you cut the roots at the surface to prevent them from growing into the sewer line? Or do you have any other suggestions? The HOA doesn't want to be responsible for the costs to repair sewer lines.
Well, of course, I would talk to an attorney. If that were me and that was my HOA, I would talk to an attorney, because I'm not sure that I'm not sure the HOA would be responsible for those repairs anyways. But that being said, a much cheaper solution, while keeping your beautiful tree coverage, would be to put in root barriers around your pipe. Root barriers cheap. You install that. You can put in root barrier cheaper than you can cut down a big live oak. How big are the live oaks?
I bet you we'll hear in a second.
Yeah, I need to know how big those live oaks are. But that's crazy. That's throwing out the baby with the bathwater, so to speak.
Okay, somebody, that's not your yard, right? Behind you, or is that?
No, that is magnolia, trellised magnolia picture I took at an arboretum, a private arboretum in South Carolina.
Yeah, somebody wanted to know what that was, so they answered. Okay,
Southern magnolia.
The gal answered. She says that the trunks range from 8 to 12 inches diameter.
Oh God, at 8 to 12 inches diameter, they're not having any pipe problems if the pipes were done right. That's nonsense. I don't even know where to start with that question. It's so the idea that an 8-inch tree is causing pipe and foundation problems. That's nonsensical. But if you're worried about it in the future, what you should do is put in, assuming you want the trees. Some people have a huge risk aversion to trees and they just don't want them. And then if that's the case, then you cut them all down. But if you want the tree, the thing to do is to get in a polypropylene root barrier. It's about 10 mils thick and 24 inches deep, and you just put that around your pipe, and then no root will ever grow into your pipe. So yeah, that's a much cheaper solution than cutting down a whole neighborhood's worth of trees.
Absolutely.
Not to mention what it'll do to your house values when you cut down every tree in the neighborhood.
Yeah. What are your thoughts on ball moss? Does it need to be controlled at a certain point?
Absolutely. So ball moss is theoretically zero effect on the tree. All right. That is when it is in modest numbers spread out over a large area. When something goes wrong with the local biome, local ecology, and you get ball moss, or for that matter, Spanish moss all over a tree, it interferes with the photosynthetic capacity of the tree. And when that happens, the tree will decline because it doesn't have enough photosynthetic leaf space to keep itself fed. So when you see a small tree littered in moss, and you start to see the bare branches, you're seeing a tree that's going hungry. So rip that junk out of there if it's starting to affect. When it looks ugly, you know something's wrong. So take that stuff out. I take ball moss out the second I see it in one of my trees. Because it's not a true parasite doesn't mean it can't have a negative effect.
What are the most common mistakes people make when growing and planting trees?
Well, there's a bunch of them that we can all make. One of the things is when one of the things I see is when they place their tree, they don't think through how big it's going to get, how wide its relationship to other trees or structure. And another thing they often forget is where you're going to be viewing that tree from. Sometimes people will walk across the street and perfectly center a tree so it's symmetrical within their yard, but they never look at the tree from there. They look at the tree from their kitchen window or when they're pulling up the street. So think about where you're most going to be enjoying that tree from, or the aesthetics that you want to get out of it, given its mature shape. So think long and hard before you actually place the tree. And the other thing I would add is, there are, like we were talking about live oaks earlier. Some people love live oaks, think they're the best thing ever. Some people hate live oaks. There are a bunch of trees that'll work if you are patient and do a little bit of homework. So just think about that and make sure you choose the right one. And most importantly, put it in the right place. And do a lot of research on this stuff. Again, when we're talking about the root zones, you'll find some people that will never plant a tree in their yard because they're convinced every tree ruins every foundation and every driveway. And then there are other people who will plant a live oak 2 feet from their driveway thinking that those roots are never going to affect it. And when in reality, the truth is somewhere in between. So don't search out one source for your information. Look around, do a bit of reading, and then decide on what you want and where you want it to go. But the good news, particularly in the Houston area, is our climate is very conducive to growing a wide number of trees, and we have plenty of natives that are just real beautiful options out there. So take your time and don't necessarily think you're restricted to what's at the local nursery.
What's your experience with sealing tree wounds? Is it helpful? Is treating the heartwood of any use?
The data says it is not. The data says that sealing it statistically does nothing. It's not harmful. So if it makes you feel better, seal away. But if you do the cut right, the pruning right, you should have no higher risk if you don't seal it.
Okay. Another question: how can you kill poison ivy growing on a tree without hurting the tree?
Well, if you want to use, so what I would do is I would cut that out at the bottom, let it die on the vine, and then I would haul it out. But I'm not susceptible to the compound in poison ivy that makes you itch. So I just rip the stuff out. So I think what I would do if I was susceptible to it is I would cut it at the base where it's growing up, and then take you need to take an appropriate weed killer and put it on that on the base of that poison ivy so that it won't grow back up. And then once that stuff up on your tree actually withers down, then you get somebody out there like me who's not susceptible to it and have them rip it out for you and haul that stuff off.
Wow. Okay.
At our tree nursery, I get the poison ivy duty because I'm the one who doesn't. I can march right through the stuff and not get a single hive on me. So I get the duty whenever we're at our tree nursery of ripping that stuff out. But the first thing you do is just sever it at the base with long, with a pair of long-handled pruners, so it stops growing upwards, and then you deal with the base at the ground level. And so you can excavate 2 or 3 inches of dirt around the root zone, and put a little drop of few drops of Roundup or something on there, and that'll take care of that. But what you don't want to do is just go spraying Roundup all over the poison ivy.
Okay, question from someone. 2 5-gallon Little Gem Magnolias. Is it possible to grow them in a large pot? And if so, is this just a short-term or a long-term option?
No, you could do a long-term option on that. They just don't get that big. And so one of the great things about Magnolias, as you can see, looking behind me here, is Magnolias are highly trainable, and a little so. So you can keep them small, eventually, it needs to be a decent sized pot, but you can turn magnolias into hedges. You can turn them into, spoliate trees. You can do all kinds of stuff with them. So I wouldn't, you're not talking about a 5-gallon pot, but if you wanted to get say a 30-gallon pot or even a little bigger and keep a little gem in it, and then keep the little gem shaped so it doesn't get tall and rangy, I would not hesitate to do that at all.
What are you thinking about the green elm borer these days? Do you think the elms, ash, green ash borer?
Emerald ash borer? Yeah, the last I checked, it was, I'm not sure if it crossed into Northeast Texas yet, but it was down in Missouri and in Northwest Arkansas. If it comes and if we are susceptible, it's going to be a problem. But you never know. When bugs like that cross climate zones, they often eventually run into a barrier to where they just won't do well. And pathogens are that way as well. Unfortunately, we're at just a wait and see, to see if our climate or our gene pool down here has something up its natural sleeve that will slow that critter down. Because if there's not, our native ash population and other associated trees are going to be in for a tough road.
Do you plant green ash? Do you plant ash trees?
I do. In fact, I have about 300 beautiful Texas ash in the ground. I'm growing them in the ground in Magnolia, at my tree farm in Magnolia.
Okay, someone has a question. They have a lot of lichen on their tree. Should they treat it?
Nope, leave it. And unless you just find it, unattractive, you can just leave it, because it just stays on the bark. So it doesn't impinge on normal biological function of the tree whatsoever. So you can just leave it unless you just find it really unattractive. I like it, and it's really slow growing. So I like to leave it, but that's my personal preference. But it will not harm your tree.
Okay, someone says, do you have any suggestions for handling tree root rot on large shoe-barred oak?
Well, this goes back to the question of what are some of the biggest mistakes people make when they plant their trees, and particularly on the red oaks like that, the shoemards and the nuttalls. You have to plant them high. They do not like wet feet, and so when you plant them in our native clay, you really need to make sure their drainage is good. So that's the first thing I would do, is check your drainage to make sure that the root system isn't staying wet. That's probably the first thing I would check. If it's persistent, you're going to fight that throughout the lifespan of the tree. Now, if it's a pathogen doing it for some other reason, then you need to do a systemic, probably an antifungal. But you would need to get an arborist out there to diagnose that.
Okay. A question, a huge crepe myrtle growing next to the house. How far back can you trim it and still have it thrive and survive? The tree is 15 years old and over 2 stories tall in Austin.
As long as you do it at the right time. If that were my tree, what I would do is I would trim it back basically however much you need to, but I wouldn't do it until probably January. Do it when it's cold if it's going to be a severe prune. The rule of thumb for pruning any tree is you never, ever, ever take more than 20% of the leaf-making capacity of the tree in a season. So try and keep it to no more than 20%. If it needs to be more than 20%, do it over 2 years. But if you do that, if you keep it to 20% and you do it in the winter, if it's a healthy crepe myrtle, like you're saying, you'll have absolutely no problem with that tree whatsoever.
Okay, the next question is pretty long. Is there any way to tell if a tree is going to fall over from the roots, even when it looks green and healthy? They've had one fall recently that looked fine. However, the exposed root system seemed small.
I would need to see that. There are things that you can tell that are indicative. I would need to see it. And if somebody has a tree that they are worried about, I'm happy to go look at it at no charge. And then, then they can just, I tell them what I do is, so I am a certified arborist, but I don't charge. And so I do go out to people and I say, this is what I would do if it were my tree. And because I have no potential for financial gain, I won't tell you that you need any work that you don't need. I just give you my opinion. So there's usually telltale signs that you may not be aware of that tree has problems. That being said, sometimes trees just go over and we don't really know why. The healthiest tree can fall over in a mild windstorm, and a sick tree can hang on for years and years and years. And sometimes it's just hard to figure out why. But usually there's evidence on site, or particularly after it falls, you can tell why it went over. But if somebody has an issue with that, they can email me and I'll be happy to drive by and take a look at them.
Okay, another question. It says, tree dudes come through the neighborhood wanting to trim our trees. Is that a good idea? That means they probably aren't arborists.
You definitely want somebody who is a certified arborist, who is supervising that crew. I would never use the people who just roll through. Some of those people know what they're doing, but if they're a certified arborist, they've hit a minimum standard because they have to take that test and they have to do CEUs. The other thing is about people who are just driving through is you don't know what they're, you don't know if they're bonded, if they have insurance. And tree trimming is a very dangerous business. In fact, I got my last arborist report, and right now in the United States, just palm trees have killed 2 people a month so far this year, just pruning palm trees in the United States. So when you're getting these, they're huge, complex structures. They're physically, geometrically, architecturally complex, and they are biologically complex. And so you really don't want somebody who doesn't know what they're doing and who isn't safe doing that. The last thing you want is to end up in court because somebody didn't know how to use a chainsaw or didn't know how to read the risk of or rig up a large branch coming down. So be very careful about that. Use only somebody who's bonded and insured and is a certified arborist. So don't let somebody prune your tree who just happens to be driving by.
Okay, you're still going good. I got a couple more questions. Okay. A pruning question. Is oak wilt a problem in Clear Lake? Should I wait to prune my oak in the heat of the summer to reduce the chance of contamination?
So oak wilt is not a problem. To my knowledge, there's only been 2 confirmed cases of oak wilt in Harris County in history. So it is not a problem here. I'm not saying it couldn't be a problem in the future, but there's something either about the pathogen or about the genetics of our live oaks that is keeping it out of here. So right now, I would not worry about oak wilt. And in terms of reducing exposure to pathogens, the summer is the last time you want to trim. You want to trim when it's cool outside, because the pathogens we get that are airborne in Houston generally thrive in hot, humid weather. So you want to prune your oak trees ideally in December, January, before they bud out. That doesn't mean you can't prune them in the summer, particularly something like a live oak. They're so durable. But the professional standard for oak pruning here is do it in cooler weather when there's not leaf material on the tree. And again, don't ever do more than 20% of the tree in a season.
Okay. Somebody wrote they have an oak tree in the front of the house and limbs have been falling off, especially when a storm comes in. It's about 50 years old. Is there something that should be done?
Yeah, so my guess is if it's about 50 years old and they're losing limbs, my guess is it's probably in the red oak family. And are they in Houston?
They do not say. Yes. Okay. She just typed yes.
Yeah. It's probably a willow or water oak, and it's probably in its those trees after 30, 40 years go into terminal decline. They're not a long-lived oak. So if you're starting to lose limbs regularly, and I'm assuming these are decent-sized limbs, not little tiny branches, either have them give me a buzz and I can drive by and look at it, or call a local arborist and have them come out and take a look at it and see what they think. A certified arborist will usually come by and take a look without charge, and then they'll give you an estimate for whatever work they think should be done.
Okay. Well, we have gotten to the end of our chat questions, and I think we've come close to wearing you out. So
no problem at all. No problem at all.
And just to remind people, if you need to get in touch with Barry, his email's easy. It's Barry at Trees for Houston, and it'll get to him. He's got a wonderful office staff.
And that's treesforhouston.org.
.org.
Yep, you got it.
Okay.
All right. Thanks, everybody. Appreciate it.
Thank you.